Hello, my name is Samuel Fulmer, and this is Cultural Safety and Training Module 1. Just a quick reminder, if you have not completed the Likert Scale questions prior to starting this module, please pause it now and complete the Likert Scale pre-test assessment. It should be linked above this module video. So this is Cultural Safety Training. This is for the Nelson faculty. My name is Samuel Fulmer. I'm a DMP student in my third year. So just kind of going over what the module will contain. We're going to go over the origins of cultural safety educational aims. We're going to define culture, and then we're going to go through some of the cultural training concepts that will kind of build up onto each other till we reach cultural safety. So we'll start with awareness, sensitivity, competency, humility, and then end at safety. We'll kind of briefly comment on historical guilt, and then we'll move into system and macro analysis, followed up by the conclusion. So cultural safety originated from New Zealand. It came from the research from Dr. Ramsden. Look at how the indigenous Maori population were worse than the white settlers within the healthcare system of New Zealand. Her work ended up being adopted in 1992 by the New Zealand Nursing Association and the government, making a requirement for all nursing and midwife courses to include cultural safety. So cultural safety allowed them to analyze the colonial white settler history and present contexts, and also the impacts and health outcomes of the indigenous population. And since then, many other countries and territories have adopted cultural safety as a requirement for all of their healthcare professionals. This is including countries like Canada, Australia, and then some of the regional territories in those districts as well. So Ramsden's aims for cultural safety in nursing education. So some of her key objectives were to educate students, nursing students and midwives, to not blame the victims of historical process for their patients' current plights, to educate nursing students to examine their own realities and the attitudes they bring to each new person they encounter in their practice, to educate student nurses to be more open-minded and flexible in their attitude towards people who are different from themselves, to whom they offer and also deliver service, and to also produce a workforce of well-educated, self-aware registered nurses and midwives who are culturally safe to practice as defined by the people they serve. So let's first start with, what is culture? So Ramsden's work, she defined the term culture in the broadest sense to apply to any person or group of people who may differ from the nurse midwife because of socioeconomic status, age, gender, sexuality, or ethnic origin, migrant refugee status, religion, belief, or disability. So we can understand cultural safety to be applicable to any type of patient that we'd be interacting with, and it's not just limited to indigenous populations. So building upon cultural safety and concepts to cultural safety. So cultural safety is built upon other concepts of cultural training for nursing students. Each concept brings an important aspect of engaging with patients from different backgrounds, as well as potential pitfalls for misapplying these concepts as well. So let's start with the first one, is cultural awareness. So cultural awareness is just where the student learns that they themselves have a culture that they grew up in. Some of them may not be aware of that culture or what it is and what it entails. And then also to then put it in comparison to the patients that they would be engaging with. So these are the various different groups of people that they will be interacting with in their nursing career, or even at their clinical practicum or their practice out in the community. They'll engage with different people. A misapplication here for cultural awareness is to judge another culture compared to the students as being correct or being incorrect. Some of the prompts that you can ask a student is when can you recall meeting someone from a different culture background than your own? What was the experience like? How did it make you feel? And then asking these self-awareness questions like, what is your culture about healthcare? And then, is it different from a patient's or somebody else that you know? And then we kind of get into cultural sensitivity, right? So as they become aware of another patient's culture and identity, they're need to then start respecting that patient's culture. So the sensitivity should be accepting it and in a non-judgmental approach, and then to also validate the patient's culture. Some of the misapplications can be to blame a patient's culture for the main cause of the patient's poor health decisions, for the cause of the patient's sickness, or the reason why they end up in the hospital. It's like, oh, well, because of their community or where they come from, this is just their reality. So kind of a prompt we can start asking students is, how can you show cultural sensitivity for a patient during an admission intake to a hospital? All right, and then after sensitivity, there's going to become cultural competency and knowledge. So cultural competency is that students would gain an increase in cultural knowledge and clinical skills to be able to engage with a patient from a specific culture or ethnicity. So this is generally understood that the skills that they need to deliver, they'll be able to have the knowledge to connect that to the patient's culture sufficient enough to deliver the care. So some of the misapplications in cultural competency and knowledge is cultural stereotyping of all the patients from that similar background or region. So they're assuming that one culture, assuming that one cultural aspect that they know of that patient then applies to everybody within that same culture or region as well. So kind of giving them a prompt to students, I came up with these two comparisons. You know, if we are talking about two Native Hawaiian patients, so we have one female Hawaiian that is Mormon or Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints from Laie, and then we have another patient from Molokai who is Hawaiian transgender woman. And if you were to discuss, you know, healthy lifestyle options after being diagnosed with heart failure for both of these patients, how would they show cultural competency or knowledge when approaching these two? Are they similar? Are they different? And how would they go about showing that to the patient when they're engaging with them in discussing lifestyle choices and specific to heart failure? And then the last one of the preceding cultural competencies or cultural training concepts is cultural humility. So this one is kind of the internal perspective that we're trying to get nursing students to achieve. And it's a lifelong learning of critical self-reflection that is respectful and also inquisitive about the patient's culture and identities and where they come from. Cultural humility is a necessary perspective a student must adopt before they can before achieving cultural safety for their patient. Sometimes there's a misapplication of this, is that a student could not fully understand a patient's culture or their experience, so there's little use for them to learn about a patient's culture or to try to take a lifelong learning approach, but rather instead of saying like, oh, I know all about this culture, they can say I have some level of understanding to engage with this culture, but also take a humble perspective and understand there's still more for me to learn, and then to also know just because I know about one patient's culture, encountering with a new patient might be a different experience from somebody I might assume is from a similar culture as well. So kind of one of these prompts you can be asking your nursing students is, how would you show cultural humility for a patient who was born and raised in South Korea and was placed on hospice? Her children and grandchildren anticipating providing care for their grandma as well. We could say these grandchildren and children were raised in Hawaii, or they came from the mainland, and like these different kinds of questions about how could they show cultural humility when engaging with this family. And then, so cultural safety is the main goal we're trying to achieve when we're engaging with patients. So students must take a cultural humility perspective to arrive at cultural safety, but it is not a guarantee. Cultural safety isn't about knowing everything about different cultures. It's about respecting differences, learning continuously, and addressing unfair power imbalances in healthcare. Cultural safety allows students the appropriate approach for engaging in multiple ethnicities, orientations, nationalities, gender, and class. So the power imbalances within healthcare is what's kind of a critical component within cultural safety, because it's asking the nursing student to understand the forces that are affecting a patient's health outcomes. So all of the other previous concepts like cultural humility, competency, knowledge, awareness don't really factor into the environment under which different cultural groups, ethnicities, genders, sexualities, and orientations are impacted by our healthcare systems, and also larger systems of policy and resources that they interact with that create a level of health, or we can also say sickness in this sense as well. So cultural safety is more about including power dynamics, and for the nursing student to understand that they have power in their own culture when they come in and interacting with a patient, and what that entails, and how they can arrive at this location between the patient and the nurse can arrive to a partnership where the patient feels culturally safe to share their beliefs, their customs, their perspectives on healthcare, and then the nurse provides their resources, how they can help them and achieve a mutual benefit for the patient. So we can kind of prompt the students by asking, a nurse is caring for a patient who is houseless from Kaneohe. How would you provide culturally safe care for this patient? And then we also are going to ask them about the historical and present situations that are influencing this patient. What healthcare structures are empowering or limiting this patient's health, and how could you address this with the patient? So, kind of continuing on this, Ramsden encouraged nursing students to provide care regardful and also in recognition of their difference between the patient and the nurse and life circumstances. So a lot of the time, people assume that we're trying to make it irrelevant, like, oh, it doesn't matter what their race is, their culture, where are they coming from, but it's actually the opposite of what you want to achieve in cultural safety. I want to be aware of where they're coming from. I want to know their history. I want to know what unique perspective they have within health so that I can help team up with them to create a healthier lifestyle choices or healing for them and what that means for them. So cultural safety goes beyond, like I was saying earlier, these other training concepts that focus on cultural beliefs and values of the patient. Instead, cultural safety requires reflecting critically on healthcare power structures that influence a patient's health. An important aspect of cultural safety care, only the patient can decide if the care they received was culturally safe. So all of the other cultural concept terms are predominantly focusing on the nursing student's perspective. The other concepts, cultural awareness, competency, sensitivity, humility, all are predominantly focused on the nursing mindset or their inner dialogue that they're having with themselves as they're engaging in a patient. So cultural safety actually puts it in the patient's power and perspective to say that only the patient can say if they're receiving culturally safe care. And so the nursing student needs to do as much as possible they can on their end to provide culturally safe care. And that's where this interaction between the two kind of takes a different approach than other previous cultural training concepts that is very unique to cultural safety. So cultural safety is asking students to start contextualizing not just the present day reality of that patient, but these patients come from communities that are also attached to histories that are both present day realities and also the past of where they've come from, and it can even be like multi-generational history that are impacting where the patient is at to this day. Then the patient's health becomes a place where the nurse and the patient become in a partnership together to address these challenges and to see where the power imbalances are to build equality and equity for health, and also create a safe space for the patient to share their own belief about how they want to move forward. So as we're asking nursing students to learn about histories of patients, and then also in part of this is they become aware of their own advantages or privileges that they experience within healthcare that their patients didn't experience, and this can sometimes stir up feelings like historical guilt. So when students are learning about the histories and present realities of their patients in healthcare, when these historical guilt feelings, we'll call it historical guilt, it's important to allow students to acknowledge these feelings and then also time for them to reflect and share these feelings in like a safe environment. So when you're presenting this concept to your students, you want to give them an opportunity to share these uncomfortable feelings. We want to validate them. We want to understand that it's okay that they feel this way. And then to understand that the aim of learning about a patient's culture and history isn't to make the student feel the historical guilt, but to draw attention to how healthcare systems and powers influence health outcomes for their patients, and then to be able to really activate them to do something about it. So we can kind of give them some prompts and guide them this way. We can ask, what feelings arise when you learn about the history and present reality of the inequality and equity of a patient? How do you approach a patient with this knowledge in mind? So, and then we kind of ask this reflective process to say, what power do you possess within healthcare? How might you support a patient to address these inequalities and inequities within the health system? So we're really trying to not only empower the patients, but also allow our nursing students to understand the power that they possess, and then to be able to really start transforming the healthcare system, to empower nursing students and patients to join together so they can address these structural imbalances and to create a space of healing for them. By the institutions, governments, regulating bodies, and research to achieve culturally safe care. It can't be left just to the individual healthcare professionals that are going in and taking care of the patients without the systemic support. So this is kind of both not only from a bottom-up approach, but from also top-down. It needs to be happening at the same time. Cultural safety is a process to analyze the effects from the macro healthcare systems to the micro individual patient level. And we're trying to engage nursing students to start connecting these types of kind of abstract ideas and concepts, like why does this policy and or healthcare policy, how is it going to interact with me delivering care to a patient now? And then the next modules, we're kind of looking at how the research is played out with cultural safety in mind, whether that's cultural safety training or doing healthcare interventions for different minority groups, and how they design it and keep in mind the aims of cultural safety. So kind of in conclusion, cultural safety is rather a paradigm shift when we're engaging with patients from multiple ethnicities, orientations, nationalities, genders, and class. Students learn to see a patient's health include a variety of factors instead of just focusing on learning their rituals, their customs, or group practices, and a typical stereotyping checklist approach to understanding a culture. Instead, cultural safety allows nursing students to be aware of not only their own culture, but their power as an RN and how it is different from their patient and what they can give to their patient and provide service for them. It asks the RN to connect with their patients in a partnership to provide healthcare services. So this concludes the ND module. Please finish watching the second module and then finishing the lacquer skills after that. Thank you so much.